All right. Hello, everyone watching. Just going to let everyone join. Thanks for waiting, guys. I will get straight into the essay feedback momentarily. Just going to let a few others join, but feel free to say hi. Let me know that you can hear me okay. Just put something in the chat. How's everyone going? We will get into the feedback in just a moment. Excited to show everyone the new Jedi tool as well. So this is Jedd's AI assisted feedback and marking tool. So if you want instant feedback on your essays, you can now use Jedi. It's literally going to give feedback in the way that I would, in the way that an experienced teacher would, and you can use it for other forms of writing as well. So super excited to announce the launch of Jedi, and I will show you what the platform looks like in just a second, but I'm going to be giving you direct feedback myself on this occasion, because you can also request feedback from someone like me via the Jedi platform. So if you're interested in getting instant feedback whenever you want on your essays, whether it's through Jedi itself, which will give you feedback in around about a minute, fully detailed, broken down, it'll give you overall marking grades, then you can do that. Or you can just request feedback from the community, from someone like a tutor or a teacher as well, and just wait a little bit longer until they return that feedback. So that's super exciting. But how's everyone going? Let me know if you're here in the chat. I think there's going to be a slight delay, but great to see that a few of you are on here at the moment. I'll jump into the feedback in just a second. We'll go through how to look at an essay introduction in one case, and then we'll look at a body paragraph in another, give you some useful tips on how you can improve your writing. So I'll share my screen in just a sec, and then we'll get into it. But if you have any questions about your essays, about what you're learning in class at the moment, put them in now. Good time to ask just now, and then I'll take some more questions later as well. But you can ask questions whenever you want, and I will get to them as soon as I have finished going through it. Hey, Sam, good to see you. Thanks for joining. Did you submit something, Sam? I've got a couple up here. I'm not sure I'm going to get to everyone's. We had quite a few people submit, so I'll try and get to the rest in the next live. But let me know what you're studying at the moment, Sam. Let me know what you're up to, and then we'll get into the first one. I've got an essay on the castle here that I'm going to break down. But Sam, let me know what subject you're doing, what text you're doing, and I will try and get to that. If not this session, priority next session. All right, so I'm going to share my screen right now, and we can get into it. You guys are getting an exclusive view. And hi, Yuki. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Nice to see you. Thanks for submitting. Hopefully I get to yours. I'll just go through the first one now, and I will share my screen with you. Let's take a look at the Jedi platform. Let's see what's happening. I'm going to see if I can get should I put my face in the corner like that? Can everyone see that? I pulled up a few different tabs, a few different versions on here. This is Jedi. Have a look at this. So if you subscribe to Jedi on the Jedi platform, then once you log in, you can actually see a page like this. And imagine just being able to go get feedback, put in a new draft, and literally request feedback. You can request it like this. There's Jedi waiting for you. Wait about a minute. You'll get full annotations on the essay. You'll get marking grades. You'll get suggestions. You get actual sentences suggested to you that show you how you can improve the sentence. You can also ask a teacher if you're with a school group, or you can ask someone from the community like myself. So that's pretty cool. If you want to get feedback anytime, you can do that now. So this is a revolutionary tool to get feedback and mark in whenever you want as you prepare for your exams. So I'm just going to go through this and work off it. But you can see here, if you wanted to create a new draft, you can. Here are all the stored drafts here on the side. Okay, and in this case, we've put in our subject, English. It's an analytical task. It's an essay. Notice how you could put in an imaginative, a discursive, a persuasive. So you've got all of this. And Sam, English Standard Studying the Castle. Well, hopefully this is yours. I've got the castle essay up here. I can't remember if there was more than one, but I'll go through and give some feedback. I think there was only one paragraph put in here. I think that's just so we can get through some more. But if you have a body paragraph for me to look at, it'd be awesome to check that out as well. So if you can send that through, if this is your introduction, then that would be awesome because, there you go, Sam. So good to see that it's yours. Again, we're using the Jedi tool here to actually look at this, but you could just get Jedi to do exactly what I'm going to do for you anytime you like, 1 minute to get a full response. So that is Jedi, which you can get on the Jedi website. Okay. So the question for this essay is, language is a powerful vehicle that develops an individual's distinct identity and sense of belonging to the community. To what extent is this statement true of the castle? All right, maybe I should. I'm going to try and just move my face from this thing because I realize it might be getting in the way. I'll leave it for now. That's all right. I'll keep scrolling up. So maybe that's a bit better. All right. What are the keywords of this question? Language is a powerful vehicle that develops an individual's distinct identity. All right. So key focus is on language. We need to identify the type of language that's relevant to the castle. We need to talk about how it can develop an individual's distinct identity. So it's important that we talk about whose identity is being developed, whose identity is even relevant in the castle. And we also need to connect it to the notion of belonging to a community. What community are we talking about? So there's a few elements in here that actually need to be unpacked. So let's see how well you've done that. Remember, the key there is to identify the 2 to 3 key terms in the question, and then to make sure that you have expanded in some way on each of them. So language, well, what type of language? Be specific about that. You don't have to necessarily be that specific at the outset because you don't want to start too specific and then get broader. You want to start broad in your introduction and get more specific. But we need to say something about the type of language, how it's being used. Is it through the language of satire? See, it's good to connect a word like language to something to do with the genre or the form, because the form and genre is to do with the text as a whole. So if I'm thinking about how I'm going to unpack the word language in my very first sentence of the intro, I want to use it at the highest level. So I would probably say satirical language. I'm not going to jump straight into Aussie slang, or Australian slang, or colloquialisms are used. Humor is used. There's all these smaller parts that all stem from the satirical form, perhaps, or other types of form or genre, whatever's applicable to the text you're doing. So make sure you try and start really broad when you define what language means so that it basically applies to the whole text. And then when you get more specific and you get into specific examples, you can actually talk about more specific type of language, like comedic language, humorous language, colloquial language. Don't say colloquialism, say colloquial language, because that shows the marker that you're directly answering the question. Don't leave it to chance. Okay, so a couple of points about unpacking the keyword there. And then language is a powerful vehicle that develops. Don't overvalue every word here. Like basically it's language, powerful vehicle that develops an individual's distinct identity. Well, what do you know? It's identity, language, culture. That's the name of the module. So yes, identity is going to be important, but it's a distinct identity. Why is the person's identity unique? Or what is characteristic of it? What's typical of this person's identity? And sense of belonging to the community. Okay, so connecting language to some kind of community, we need to specify what type. Let's have a look at the introduction here that the student has written. So language is both a reflective mirror of individual identity and a complex web of societal constructs which interacts with personal experiences and cultural nuances to shape a dynamic sense of belonging within communities. All right, I'm just going to zoom in a bit on this so everyone can see. The first thing I'm going to say is there's a lot in that, isn't there? You can kind of hear it as I say. Hopefully you can see that. There's a lot going on here, and it's sounding general, which in some ways can be good as your very first sentence, but we want to make sure that we're not losing the meaning. Have you actually said something specific here? So, and have you avoided just repeating the question? Language is both a reflective mirror of individual identity. Okay, so again, like it says here, language is a powerful vehicle that develops an identity. You're saying it's a reflective mirror. So I guess you're in some ways disagreeing with it, but you're more just adding on to it. You're not like saying that's not true. You're saying it's also this. And then you say, and a complex web of societal constructs which interacts with personal experiences and cultural nuances to shape a dynamic sense of belonging within their communities. Okay, see, I think this is just overly complex. Like there's lots of big words, societal constructs, but I think you could do a better job at just hitting the question, right? Really nailing that question. How does it develop an individual's distinct identity? And then you need to tie that to sense of belonging. It seems like you've said it's a dynamic sense of belonging. So well done on specifying the type, right? Which is good. Dynamic sense of belonging. And you say within their communities. See what type of community generally, right? You see how there's nothing unique about the community part here, a belonging to community. So I understand that if you're not mentioning the text, it's pretty hard to do that. That's why this first sentence can be tricky, because you don't want to be too specific because you're not even bringing in the text yet. So sometimes you might just want to, in the very first sentence, actually go straight into the text to avoid this problem. Because if we can't get this specific enough, then we would rather just bring in Sitch's text, the castle, straight away. Because I feel like these sentences, because they're not to do with the text, they're to do with the module as a whole, they're going to be very vague by definition, right? Because you're not specifying the text, so you have to be vague. And that's because there's so many key terms to unpack here. You're going to be basically repeating the question more or less. So we kind of need the text to help unpack it and differentiate it. Okay. Yes. No. So Sam, you need help specifically with creating thesis statements. I'll just pop that up here. This is from Sam. Thesis needs to stand out. It does. But can we just remember a couple of things here? The thesis is basically the whole introduction in a sense. Is there a thesis statement? Yes, like you could call it the first sentence or two. You could also call it the last sentence of your introduction. I find that the first sentence or two is really just establishing the complexity of the issue, which you have done here in some way. But it's not really your thesis as such, right? What's your overall argument? It's probably what you're saying throughout the entirety of the introduction. So I would think about your entire introduction as laying out your argument. And then I would think about the first couple of sentences as just introducing the complexity of the topic in relation to the question. But when you say thesis, you're probably referring to these two. You can still mention the text in your thesis, just so that's clear, okay? Let's come back to that, because I feel like, both of these are relatively vague. Through language, individuals express their identities, but also reinforce their connection to a community. Again, like you've just subbed out, you've put connection instead of belonging, right? So you can see that is really just the word you're using instead of belonging. But if you then pretend that you did use belonging, you haven't actually said anything specific. So Sam, I think the best thing you could do, my first impression here, is to go straight into something specific about the castle, right? So you might talk about the language of satire. And that way it's more specific. That's going to help you stand out, okay? Try and avoid these vague module-based thesis statements that don't relate to the text at all, because you can only be vague, all right? So that's a really important point. So let's kind of get rid of these parts, because I just feel like they're just too waffly and vague, and there's nothing specific going on. But we can use what you said here, and let's just try and work with it and see how we can actually say something more specific. Now, I'm going to look at your next sentence to see how we can do that. So you say, to a great extent. You don't really need that unless, and by the way, everything I'm saying is subject to what your teacher has said. So if your teacher says, I want you to actually say to a small extent, to a limited extent, to a large extent, then do that. But I would typically not do it. So I would cut to a great extent out. Okay, so we're going to get rid of that. And we're just going to say Rob Sitch is Australian. Don't worry about Australian here, because we can use that elsewhere in the sentence. Rob Sitch's 1997 comedy film, The Castle, vividly illustrates how language plays a pivotal role. See how you haven't actually said the type of language, that this is the issue, but now you can, because we know that we're talking about This particular film, it's a comedic film. It's got satire in it. So Rob Stitch's 1997 film vividly illustrates how satirical language, see, satirical is good because the whole thing is a satire. So it applies to the whole text. So this is a good word to use. Rob Stitch's that illustrates how satirical language plays a pivotal role, and it says here is a powerful vehicle. So it's clear what your stance is. You don't need to say to a large extent. You're saying it's a pivotal role. So that is actually linking to the powerful vehicle. And you could even say that because you might just convince yourself that you're answering the question otherwise. You've got to be more specific than what the question is. So simply changing words around and using synonyms isn't enough. It plays a pivotal role in the development of the Kerrigan's identity within a small Australian town. Well, at least you've specified the who, but you haven't specified the what type, like the Kerrigan's identity within a small Australian town. What do you mean their identity? Their sense of identity as a family, right? And there's also the national identity that's talked about. So there's other things that hopefully you'll bring in after. But if we're just going to talk about the Kerrigans, it's the development of the Kerrigans family, right? As a what? Like as a, as a typical, is it a typical Australian family? As the, I mean, kind of, a good word you can use is quintessential, like they're the classic Australian family, right? In the development of the Kerrigan's identity as a quintessential Australian family. And then we can get rid of within a small town. I mean, you can add that detail elsewhere, but the most important thing that you can do there is talk about their identity as something. See how I'm using the word as there? That's to help you then bring in this part. So it helps you specify a little bit more. Throughout the film, language is imbued with various values. So what you're now going to do is list, and we don't like listing. Listing takes away from sophistication. So throughout the film, language is imbued with various values. Okay, here are all the values, including social class, which marginalizes and divides. Oh, okay, you actually only say one. So again, I'm preempting. I'm just reading this for the first time now. Language is imbued with various values. Well, then in that case, I don't really like this part because it's vague, like with various values including. Why don't you just say it's about this? Just say the one thing. It has more punch. It has more potency. It's going to have more impact. So throughout the film, language is imbued with various values. Yeah, see how vague that sounds? Social class, which marginalizes. So you're saying the language is imbued with social class. So language is used. Now, whose language? What type of language? Just keep asking those questions and force yourself to be more specific. I'm less familiar with the castle. It's a less recent text for me, but I'm doing my best here. Throughout the film, again, we don't want to use the satirical, but we could maybe chuck in a couple of broad things. So like, because this is our second sentence now, both colloquial and ironic, right? Irony is a big part of satire as well. That's why satirical language is so good up here, because you can then just talk about everything that relates to it. Throughout the film, both colloquial and ironic language is used to reflect the power of language. Both colloquial and ironic language is used to reflect the power. Or you could say colloquialisms. Yeah, because we're going to say language. I'll do it this way. Because we're going to say language there, I don't want to repeat the word language. So yeah, you're mentioning some other values in the comments, but it's good to kind of spread them over the course of the intro rather than list them all, right? Throughout the film, colloquialisms and irony are frequently used, right, to reflect the power of language, right? To reflect the power of language to, and you want to say social class, okay, to reflect language or to demonstrate language, to reveal language as a reflection as a reflection of social class, which marginalizes and divides. Now, marginalizes and divides, that's pretty similar, right? Which marginalizes different groups with distinct identities. Okay, see, different with distinct, which marginalizes culturally diverse groups, which marginalizes culturally diverse groups of individuals or just groups. I'm just going to check that this even makes sense. Throughout the film, colloquialisms and irony are frequently used to reveal language as a reflection of social class, which can even, what kind of argument are you making here? Frequently used to reveal language as a reflection of one's social class, which can marginalize. So the language itself, which can marginalize culturally diverse groups of individuals. Okay. I'm hoping that still makes sense. Language is a path to development and a sense of belonging. So we need to bring it back to this belonging to the community, though, right? However, language also serves as a unifying force, connecting individuals on a personal level and fostering sentiments of belongingness. I don't know about belongingness. Couldn't you just do belonging there? I like the however, though, because that's showing the complexity. However, language also serves as a unifying force, connecting. Again, you need to kind of be specific every time you say it. What type of language are you actually referring to? Language, is it dialogue? I mean, dialogue's really important. So when you get a word like language in the question, you need to interpret it as broadly as possible. So dialogue relates to language, obviously, right? However, the film's dialogue, right? And you might come up with an adjective to describe that type of dialogue. The film's dialogue or dialogic language, right? If we want to say the film's use of language through dialogue, right? However, the film's use of language through dialogue also serves as a unifying force, connecting individuals on a personal level and thereby fostering a sense of belonging to who or to what. That's the key, right? Sense of belonging to one's, what is it, to their culture, and thereby foster to their family, to one's cultural heritage or something, right? If you're talking about it in a sense of the national identity, maybe you'll talk about it differently, because I know there are issues of fairness in there. And Gruby, hello, good to see you. We're just doing some essay editing here. In the egalitarian society depicted in the film, maybe that's a little bit vague. Try and just be specific about that. So what society are you actually talking about? Like, can you mention a town or something specific to that? So I'll just put the vague part here. Language transcends social barriers. Contributing to the cultivation of a collective identity. Again, that's a pretty good one, but it's just fairly vague. Like, it would be good if you could link this to some of the plot developments. Now, you've got to be careful when you do that. You don't want to simply retell the plot and what happens in the story. But when you come out with these concepts, these ideas, like, even though you're doing a good job of using the words of the question, and I should say that you've done a great job of using the words of the question, which a lot of people struggle with, what you haven't done is kind of contextualize these ideas in relation to the actual film. So I'm not getting a good sense of how these actually play out in the film. So we need to subtly weave in aspects of the plot into each of these sentences, right? Again, here's an example, like in the egalitarian society depicted. Isn't this all about a land dispute, right? With the castle, how they view their home, right? So you need to actually provide a bit of context there. Like, as the Kerrigans, and again, I'm not super fresh on this particular text at the moment, so bear with me if I make any small errors here in terms of plot. But thank you, Gruby. That's good. Let me know what text you're doing, Gruby. I'll see if I've got it on the list. Now, as the Kerrigans because we need to get some plot in here. So it's just by simply adding some character details within the sentence, but not dedicating the whole sentence to it. As the Kerrigans dispute their land rights, and then as the Kerrigans dispute their land rights in a kind of, we could say, we could connect that to context as well because of Mabo and things like that are going on, right? That's very significant that this is in a time of land rights disputes in Australia's history when Aboriginals were disputing who owned the land, that, they own the land. And we had the overruling of terra nullius, which I'm sure you've heard of that, important contextual detail. But the Mabo decision was quite influential here because that was when the government actually decided that in some cases, right, Aboriginals did have a claim to the land. So they weren't saying that in the case I'm not saying that's how it is or should be, but in that case, they decided that there could be an argument made that Aboriginals had a claim to the land. And it didn't just go without saying that the white settlers owned the land, right? So that's also something that we're looking at here as a bit of context, right? Now, as the Kerrigans dispute their land rights in an attempt, maybe I'll veer away from that for this particular plot point, but as the Kerrigans dispute their land rights in an attempt to maintain, a sense of belonging to their family home, because that's so important to the Australian identity, right? To maintain their sense of belonging. I could say connection, but why would I say connection when I can say belonging, which is in the question? For those who can't see the question, it's up here. Okay, so to maintain their sense of belonging to their family home, I'm going to just make some little changes here. So as the Kerrigans dispute their land rights in an attempt to maintain a sense of belonging to the family home, okay, now we can connect that to the egalitarianism, right? Contributing to the cultivation of a collective identity predicated upon, means based upon, egalitarian values. Now you see there, Sam, how we're getting your ideas in, but we're kind of spreading them out across the intro. Hopefully this actually lines up with the progression of your ideas in the body paragraphs. Okay, but I'm going to now delete this so it all makes sense to you. As the Kerrigans dispute their land rights in an attempt to maintain a sense of belonging to the family home. And once again, I just really want to emphasize it. We're always expanding upon the words of the question so that we're never just saying that, right? And then we could say language. I think we were going to say language, is used as a means. I don't know about transcending social barriers. Not sure of your point there, right? But are you talking about how they have to use language in that court context, right? A judicial context? The language of their voice is very important, right? Their voice is so important to maintain their rights. As the Kerrigans use the language of their voice, right? Use their voices to dispute. As the Kerrigans use their voices to maintain a sense of belonging to the family home in the wake of a land rights dispute. Notice how I just kind of flip the sentence around. This is what you're going to do. You have to keep editing it, rereading it. This is what I do. I mean, this is a real process. I haven't seen this before. So as the Kerrigans use their voices to maintain, I'm doing voices as a more subtle connection to language. I always try and get language in, but in this case, because we've said it quite a bit, it's okay. To the family home in the wake of a land rights dispute. Language, because we might end up saying here, right? Language is seen to transcend social barriers. We could say language is seen as a weapon of defense in order to cultivate. Weapon is portrayed as a weapon of defense. Weapon is portrayed as a weapon of defense against any threat against threats to a collective identity, a national identity, right? Language is portrayed as a weapon of defense against threats to a national identity that is predicated upon egalitarian values. All right, we're getting somewhere here now. So again, thanks for those who are being patient with this. Again, this is a live editing process. It's not something that just happens super quickly, particularly because I thought this introduction was lacking specific detail. And hopefully that's become clear. We've added in a lot now. We're adding in specific expansions. We're adding in specific parts of the text, key parts of the text without simply just retelling it. And we're always coming back to the keywords of the question, as you can see. And then now we're getting some nice concepts in there, okay? A defense against threats that is predicated upon egalitarian values, okay? Citra's meticulous composition of dialogue. Again, you've kind of done dialogue, setting, and form. See these kind of phrases? You lose a bit of sophistication every time you do a list like this, okay? You guys are going to lose sophistication when you list. So try, it can be difficult. Sometimes you need to do 2 words, I get that, but try to avoid ever listing and just sum things up by focusing in on the most relevant one there, right? Or maybe there's a broader word that kind of encompasses all of them, okay? You're better off doing that and dealing with each of these points separately, like I've done across this introduction. Like I said, satire up here. Then we said colloquialisms and irony. Okay, I grouped 2 of them together. Fair enough. As I said, you might do 2. But then we talked about language through dialogue. Notice how with dialogue, I didn't group it with irony and colloquialisms and satire. It's all spread throughout. Okay, that's really important. Okay, so language portrays the weapon of defense, and Citra's, I like to finish with kind of like an ultimately. Citra's meticulous. I mean, yes, people like to add these little, masterful composition, successful composition. I don't think you actually need these, so I'm going to get rid of it, but you can use them. I'm not saying it's going to detract from your marks. So ultimately, Citra's composition of dialogue, yeah, we'll get rid of that. Citra's control of language, right? Or, yeah, we can go control of language. Throughout. And do we mean language just like, again, interpret that broadly? I'm just thinking here. Do we mean language in the most literal sense? Could it be body language as well, like visual and auditory? So Citra's control of language, including, this is where you can specify here, control of both auditory, of both visual and auditory means sound. Because it's a film, you need to engage with sound, right? So many people neglect these aspects of form. Ultimately, Citra's control of both visual and auditory language. See how much better this is sounding? Encapsulates or whatever, illuminates. I don't know if we've already said that, have we? If I've already said illuminates, ignore this, use a different verb. Illuminates the power of language in shaping individual and communal identity. See, this is just that, like, it's not specific enough to have that punch at the end of the introduction. So we need to make sure that if you're going to finish your intro here, something a little bit more powerful. Citra's control of both visual and auditory language illuminates the power of language. We don't want to say that. Let's go back to the question. Powerful vehicle that develops, is seen to affirm the distinctiveness of a true Australian identity. Illuminates the distinctiveness, because we're already talking about the power by saying this. Distinctiveness of a true Australian identity. Which relies fundamentally on a sense of belonging to one's home and family. So I'll summarize those 2 as the key things. But also, right? but also the ability to use language as a force for, as a means of justice, right? To use language in order to preserve as a force of justice, as a way of preserving justice. I'm going to do that. My brain's a little bit fried. That's why I just use Jedi. Jedi knows my brain. It just does it automatically. Okay, so that is how you can take that. Thanks, Jared. It's Jonny here. But thanks, Jay. Sam, hopefully you are happy with that feedback. Let me know what you think of the feedback. That's how I would improve the introduction. Hopefully you've got that down. I will save it for you in any case. Let me know if you need it, if you haven't made those changes. There we go. So again, for everyone watching, I am on the Jedi platform. I'm doing live feedback, but if you subscribe to Jedi via the Jedd-AI platform, you can literally put in a draft whenever you want, request feedback, and you can ask Jedi and you'll get instant annotations of your work. It'll literally look like this. See this? Marks. Did you get an A, B, C, D? What about specific feedback? Now this one has applied a different rubric to it, so you can ignore some of these, but this is basically what you're going to get. You're going to get general feedback. You're going to get specific sentence by sentence feedback. So that is what you get with Jedi. Okay. You can submit as many times as you like as it currently stands. So that's pretty cool. You can also tap into the community. You can tap into our community. If we go give feedback here, okay, if we go give feedback, this is waiting for you to ask someone else for feedback and someone else to ask you for feedback, and then you can level up. So everyone can kind of help each other here in this section. So if you want to ask the community feedback, get a tutor or a teacher to give you feedback, you can literally use that option as well by clicking community. So this is how Jedi works. Okay, Sam, hopefully that helps. And once again, Groovy, if you're on here, what text did you do? I'm just going to have a look at this Artist of the Floating World text now. Okay, Artist of the Floating World feedback. We've just got an introduction submitted, I believe. I'm going to see if I've got another one coming up. I think I've got another one. Some people submitted common module essays, like the Crucible. There is a Tempest Hagseed one. Groovy, I'll try and get to that one as well. But for now, I'm just going to do this Module B essay introduction. Groovy, if you could please do me a favor, submit a paragraph of analysis. I really want to look at a body paragraph so everyone can see that. Same with you, Wenjing. If anyone else hasn't seen, there was a link. If you see it somewhere on our socials, there's a link to submit your essays or parts of your essay for feedback in these kind of sessions. And then, of course, you can use Jedi 24/7. But submit those. I'm looking for some body paragraphs to look at after one more introduction here. I'll try and go through this one a little bit quicker for you. Okay, so this is an essay submitted on Artists of the Floating World. Evaluate how your personal and intellectual engagement. So personal, intellectual basically go together, but they have been presented as separate words. So interesting that they're divided up. I'd be curious to know if this was an actual question that you've been given, because it's an odd distinction between personal and intellectual. But okay, intellectual engagement with your prescribed text has been intensified by its construction. I love the word construction in the question because a lot of people won't quite understand what that means. And even if they do, they won't think that it's actually a key word. They'll just focus on intellectual engagement. But it's saying, how has your engagement with the text been intensified, right? How has it been intensified, amplified, helped by its construction? That's the way the text has been put together. So when it says construction, it means the way the text has been put together. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can see it. And when we say the way the text has been put together, again, this word construction, we're talking about the text's form. This novel is a prose fiction novel, right? It's prose fiction. It's written with an unreliable narration, right? First person narration. It's retrospective as well. So it's a narration style that looks back at the past. So Ono, the protagonist in this novel, is always looking back, and he's looking back at the past, and he's trying to almost justify and rewrite history because he feels guilty about his involvement in World War II. He was part of the Japanese nationalist movement. He was an artist, and he made propaganda, and he kind of rallied people together, and everyone fought, and people died, as you know, and ultimately Japan was the victim of 2 atomic bombs being dropped. So, no one won in that situation, obviously. And then Ono's generation, because they were the ones who kind of were part of the war, they got blamed for it because they created that patriotism, and they made people want to go to war. So the younger generations blamed them. And then you also have America coming over after it won the war because it dropped the bombs on Japan. And Americans come over and they start creating a new culture, and they make Japan more Western, and they get rid of its old traditional values. The notions of honor and reputation, they became less valuable. So that's the context of Artist of the Floating World. You've got a guy who is kind of living in the past, and he's trying to rewrite it so he doesn't look as bad because he was so proud of who he was, but now he doesn't know who he is because the later generations blame him and they're calling him a really bad guy for what he did in the war. But he's thinking, how was I to know at the time? So it's an interesting reflection of that. And it also shows how people convince themselves of false truths, and that people are often caught between competing philosophies or ideologies. So that's a little rant on Artist of the Floating World. Great novel to study. It has a lot of great ideas and concepts in there. Definitely a trickier one, but a more rewarding one, as tends to be the case. So we're evaluating how our engagement with the text has been intensified by the way it's been written, the narration style, the retrospective structure, the fact that it's prose fiction, the fact that it's fiction, that it's made up. Okay, we're going to be looking at a lot of that. The fact that it's non-linear. So the fact that the storyline actually jumps between past and present and other random moments, and you're trying to kind of follow Ono's digressions. They're called digressions. So it has this digressive structure where he keeps getting distracted. Excuse me. So some interesting points there about the construction. Excuse me. So notice how just there in me talking about this, when we're thinking about how the text has been put together in those ways, think about how that makes us engage with it. If we're seeing that the narrator of a story is struggling to remember certain things because he's even doubting his own voice, there's that uncertainty in his own voice, that self-reflexivity, that metatextuality embedded in there because he knows that he's the narrator and he knows that he's unreliable. That is engaging us intellectually because it's making us question something. So when it says intellectual engagement, I'm thinking, how is it making me question or challenge or criticize or rethink, reevaluate something? And here it is actually making us question, right, the validity of our memories, right? And question the reliability of our memories because we see the way that it can be rewritten, that they can be manipulated, that they can be fallible, they can be wrong in order to validate our sense of self. If I want to convince myself that I'm right, I'm going to think about everything I've done in a really favorable way. So when I tell a story about what I did last year, I'm going to paint a really bright picture, even if I did a few things that weren't so positive. I'm only going to think about them in a good way. So I'm basically manipulating, I'm distorting my view of the past to make myself look better. That's what this text is about. It's about someone going back and he's in denial. And when you're in denial, you tell yourself stories. I'm sure this is resonating with you. So if you guys wanted to convince someone of something, you're going to present a story or a narrative that supports your point. You're not going to necessarily want to tell them every little detail that could in some ways take away from your point, because obviously the truth is complex. It's not just about one person's opinion. But that's what Ono tries to do to convince us that he's innocent in this whole affair and that he shouldn't be blamed. So interesting points here about intellectual engagement and the text construction. I think I've given you a lot to think about, hopefully. So Kazuo, I'm sorry I'm getting the name wrong of the author in terms of pronunciation there, but Kazuo Ishiguro, his meta-historical novel, it is meta, it's metafictional. I wouldn't put them together, by the way. I'd probably just do metafictional. It's also postmodern, right? And then you can talk about maybe I'll do postmodern here. I don't know if you've said it else. You've said post-war era. Let's see. I'll do postmodern because that's like the type of novel it is. It is very postmodern because it's challenging our sense of the truth and what's reliable. Like, we can't believe anything we're being told in the story. So it's making us question the truth of things, which is postmodern. That's a postmodern quality, rather. And we want to use that metafictionality as a point elsewhere here, just to really show that we understand the construction, the metafictional construction of the novel. See how much nicer that sounds? I don't really want to waste that word here. So the postmodern novel, As the Floating World, always good to have the date. Is it like 1986 or something? Again, a little bit hazy in my memory. I haven't looked at the date for a while. Let me have a look. Yep, 86. Skillfully illuminates. Again, everyone likes to put this skillfully. Don't worry about words like that. Just get to the point, unless it says like how effectively or something like that. So, by the way, I'll get rid of this if it helps. Maybe that actually lines it up better for you. Okay, so illuminates the postmodern. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I'm blind. Postmodern novel illuminates the postmodern society focused on. Yeah, don't worry about that anyway. Focused on personal and cultural ramifications of a post-war era. This is all too vague. Provoking questions of my engagement with the construction of personal and national identity. No. So see how you've used the word construction. You said the construction of identity. That doesn't count as you using the word construction here. The word construction here is talking about the construction of the text. That's to do with the form of the text, and yet you're using it in a different way that shows you don't understand what it means. So this is really important. You can't use it in this way. If you're using the word construction here, we've got to use it in the way that the question intends. So even though you need to be flexible with how you use the words of the question, you can't actually completely distort it and make it mean something it just definitely doesn't. Okay, so there is a line there. Illuminates. Okay, so a postmodern novel kind of, I'm going to say, uses or utilizes its metafictional construction. You know what? And now that I'm writing this, I am going to add as a postmodern text, because I'm going to change this one here to prose fiction. Prose fiction novel As the Floating World utilizes its metafictional construction. See, this is what markers want to see, because it's immediately specifying the type of construction. Look at that. It's a double whammy. It's a metafictional construction as a postmodern text, right? Perfect. Utilizes metafictional construction as a postmodern text to do what, right? To intensify, right? I like saying our. It says, how is your personal intellectual? Yes, does that mean you now say my and I? You can, because it says, how is your personal engagement? So maybe we'll go with that. Utilizes it to intensify. I'm still going to say the responders, and then you can say I or my in other instances, but just to keep it a little bit more general, which would typically be the case. Or otherwise you say we or our. That's okay to use. Utilizes metafictional construction to intensify the responders' kind of intellectual questioning of truth. You see, it's a questioning of truth, but I'm adding intellectual questioning of truth, because again, the underlined parts here, are actually focusing on where I'm expanding on the keywords of the question. To intensify the responders' intellectual questioning of truth, right? Okay. Particularly as we observe the kind of decline or the increase in, how do we want to say it? Particularly as we observe particularly as we trace, the ever, the escalating self-doubt of the narrator owner. There we go. So that's a nice sentence. And then you can unpack that after. But look at how much that engages with the words of the question from the outset. And it doesn't misapply the keyword, okay? Try to avoid personal and national identity, by the way. Don't group them, just focus on one. So we're going to get rid of that one. The novel delves into the complexities of individual and collective. See how you're tending to always group? Let's be careful of that, okay? And pursuit of status amidst the backdrop of the erosion of historical values. Well, that's true. There was an erosion. Where societal, notice all the commas that are starting to pop up here. Okay, where societal status and reputation hold immense significance. Okay, but it's still quite vague. Let's see if you go more specific. Ishiguro explicates the immersion of internal conflicts of honor to provide insight of how traditional values, such as the importance of status. Yeah, see how you said status, status, status? Look at that. Would you look at that? You got status a few times there. So I don't really think you need any of this bit here about status, but you can have like the erosion of historical values, the erosion of traditional values from the past. I like that. I like this concept here. And I like the erosion. It has a nice sophistication, a nice flair to it. So we'll keep that. But I'm going to merge it. I'm going to merge these two. Outward signs of power and prestige were being eroded. Look, see, you've even copied it. So these two sentences really just repeat each other. The second one seems to be more specific than the first. So I always prioritize that. Make sure you use British English spelling as well, by the way. Americanized Japan. Okay. So if you say, all right, it's good to keep going on with the construction. Indeed, the novels, the unreliability, look at this, the unreliability of the novel's first-person narrative voice, right? Or first-person narration, right? Now, how do I deal with construction? Indeed, the unreliability of the novel's first-person construction, which I'm going to bring it to the construction. Which lies at the center of its construction. Indeed, the reliability of the novel, which lies at the center of its construction. Yeah, because him talking about it from a first person is so key. You can add this little clause here to connect it to the word construction. So I'm going out of my way to do it, but I'm doing that to show you how important it is to, again, engage with the keyword of the question there. Don't use a synonym, use the actual word. So the unreliability of novel's first word, which lies at the center of its construction, and then I'm using what you say here, reflects Ono's internal conflict. I'm just working off what you have there in these next two sentences. Internal conflict between the preservation of his former status and the Americanized post-war values, the Americanized post-war values that radically eroded the past. Something like that, okay? You see, and then that covers these two sentences. So those two sentences are covered now. The context, try to avoid things like the contextual concerns are highlighted through the strategic use of language. See this, I would just get rid of all of this. That's really important. That's a waste of a sentence. Okay, that's a waste of a sentence because you haven't said anything. You've just said context highlighted through language, form, and features. Those words will just mean nothing. Be specific at all times or don't include it. Prompting readers to not only empathize with the characters, again, be specific with Ono, but also I would say it's more to question. That's the intellectual part. To contemplate universal truths associated even with human. This sentence is just far too vague. It doesn't really offer anything specific. So we're at a point where we can get rid of all of this. So I'm still left with just these two sentences at the moment. I don't think we can use anything from here. The erosion of traditional values and the obsession of status resonates with the reader. The deeper intricacies of human experience. Don't revert to human experience language. Like you said, being human here. See that? Why we're saying being human, human experience. This is not the human experience module. So don't make it look like you've got the modules mixed up. Okay. Yes, everything is to do with human experience. I get that, but try to avoid those words if you can. You could use them occasionally, of course, but it's sounding too human experience-y, and I think it's kind of making you just lose specific insights here. What you could do is say, drawing upon Thatcherism, because the context of Ishiguro was that he was living in London at the time that he wrote it. He wasn't living in Japan, contrary to popular belief. Drawing upon Thatcherism, right, and the instability, that the social and political instability in that permeated England during the 1980s. Because it was in a period of transition. So Ishiguro wrote this at a time of transition where the country was moving from one set of values to another, which reminds us of Japan pre and post-war, right? Okay, so Ishiguro has constructed the novel as kind of an allegory, right? Allegory, or what's the other word we could use? An analogy, but it's an allegory for maybe not. Maybe I won't use. Well, it kind of is an allegory, actually, because an allegory is something that stands for something else, has a deeper meaning, right? I'm just trying to think if that's the right word that I want to use. Yes, that was an allegory for the tensions of his present context, demanding that the reader engage intellectually with the universal, because it didn't just happen pre and post war Japan. It's happening in Britain as well. So history is repeating itself. That's what he's saying. Demanding that the reader engage intellectually with the universal struggle to reconcile competing truths in a post-modern world. Okay, I know that's probably a little bit fluffy. I would change that, but I'm just trying to wrap this up for you. That would be a much stronger three-sentence intro. It has something about context as well. Thatcherism, really important to mention that in any Artists of the Floating World introduction. You have to mention Thatcherism. Okay, so that's that. Do I have time for one more? I might have to do the others in the next session. I feel like I want to. Any questions now? I just want to take some questions. I know you guys have submitted a lot of like Crucible 84 essays. Evie, you've done a body paragraph, which is great to see. I'm just trying to think. Maybe okay. Let me have a look. Let me see what I can do. Let's see. Do you guys have any questions in the meantime? Someone did submit a bunch of questions. How do you find balance between formal and casual in multimodal presentation? So let me just put that question in here in the meantime. So if you guys are doing multimodal presentations, Sam, appreciate the feedback on that. Sam says Jedi is really good. So Sam's using Jedi. If you need to know how to use Jedi, go to the Jedi website. All you gotta do is go to the Jedi website. See how this one says Feedback Hub? That's where you can get unlimited feedback, right? But if you click on Jedi, you will literally find, look, got this cool graphic. You will literally find a link to start up, and you can sign up, and then you'll be able to click on the Feedback Hub and get feedback for your essays, okay? Pretty useful. Way cheaper than a tutor. And even if you have a tutor, which I know a lot of people do, this is just something you should have on the side, because you're going to get 24/7 responses, and you have the option of 24/7 feedback. It's not just like 1 hour a week. Okay. So appreciate the feedback, Sam. Really do. Please leave us a review on Google reviews if you can under Jedd-AI. That would mean a lot. I'm just going to answer another question from a student. How do you find a balance between formal and casual in multimodal presentations? I'm just going to put this question up. This is what someone just asked me via email. How do you find a balance? And let me hide this. Boom, here we go. How do you find a balance between formal and casual in multimodal presentations? Okay, so that's a really good question, because in a multimodal, if you're doing, say, a speech or you're recording something, there is a slight difference between the script of that speech and an essay. But let's start with rule number one. Basically, a multimodal presentation is a spoken essay. That's the starting point, right? The starting point, rule number one, treat it at first like a spoken essay, meaning write out an essay to the multimodal task. It should sound exactly like an essay that you would write in the exam. Step number two, rule number two, make the language more personable. So make it sound like you're addressing your audience. And if you've been given an audience, refer to it and make sure that's clear. Sometimes you give a presentation as a TED talk, right? So you need to acknowledge that you're there. In my talk today, I'm going to discuss this. But that's only if it gives you that context. So you need to read the multimodal task really carefully and understand your audience. So I'm going to make that rule number two. Adjust the language for your audience. Brackets, read the question and the task really carefully. Sometimes there is no specific audience and they say, just do a multimodal presentation. Well, in that case, because it's a presentation, we go to step number three, which is that, okay, there is no specific audience, so it's pretty much just like an essay. We might want to just make it a little bit more engaging for the person watching my presentation. How do you do that? You can use slightly more personal language. So you can use I and you. You is good. We, like to talk about what we all experience when you relate an idea that you're talking about to your audience. And so using personal pronouns, I, you, we, second person pronouns there as well. Inclusive pronouns, us. We can all relate to this. And then I would say, secondly, I mean, that's the first one. Secondly, I would say a couple of rhetorical questions can help. You even start in the presentation with, have you ever felt like this? Try not to be cliche, like I'm being here, but have you ever felt this? Have you ever experienced this, right? Have you ever felt caught between these two things, right? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where da-da-da-da-da? If I link it to Artists of the Floating World, you might start a multimodal with, have you ever found yourself in a situation? Have you ever found yourself in a situation, or have you ever found yourself in an argument where your version of events is the complete opposite of someone else's, right? Because then that gets into the idea of there being competing perspectives and that truth isn't so simple after all. So rhetorical questions, personal language, that's going to help. Let me just see what a couple of the other questions are. And Sam, can Jedi deconstruct questions? It can. It does that at the end in the general feedback. So if you haven't answered the question properly, then what it will do is help you in its comments unpack that question. So it'll give you some guidance on how you can actually approach the question. So go to the general comments at the bottom if you've struggled with understanding the actual question. But that's a really good point. We'll look at how we can make that more explicit, as I think that would be really useful as well, like having a separate part there for breaking down the question. That's a great idea. But at the moment, I would say best bet is in the general comments part, and also it will help you deconstruct it by the examples that it provides when it gives specific comments. Like if you haven't answered the question in that sentence, it's going to reconstruct it and help you actually unpack that question. When's the next session from Groovy? Yes, Groovy, I did want to get to that Mode body just submitted. When are people's assessments? I know they're all coming up. They're all creeping up, aren't they? So question is, when is the next session, Mr. Jonny? The next session, I'm going to try and do it sooner, but I don't want to overpromise because I always try and find time and then a million things come up. But I actually want to do a lot more of these live streams. I mean, now I've got my friend Jedi to help. That makes things a lot easier. So let's say, I mean, I don't want to promise too much by saying tomorrow evening, but even if I jump on, record something, upload it, I'll try and get to them. William's exam's just finished. Groovy says I have a practice task on Saturday where I submit for feedback. My actual task is like start of April. Okay, start of April. We're mid-March. Let's see what I can do next week. No reason why I can't do one of these next week. I'll try and jump on Thursday evening. Okay, so we'll put out a post. So follow us on the socials, 7:30. I want to end the session now. It's been a nice hour. Any other questions I can answer that don't involve, and Evie, you're the same. So I will get to those. Just resubmit if I haven't covered them today on the next form, but I think we'll use the same link and I'll just cover the other ones in order, that they were submitted. So first in, best dressed kind of thing. Hopefully that's been helpful. Just a couple of other questions that are coming up. Yeah, is a multimodal the same structure as an essay? 1 second. This is a question that I just received via email. Is a multimodal the same structure as an essay? Well, as I said, by default, yes, it is a spoken essay. So just write out an essay and then speak it. But two things to keep in mind. Firstly, what is the audience that you have been assigned to address? So read the task very carefully. Are you at a TED Talk? Are you speaking to a group of year 12s? Or are you simply doing a presentation with a general audience, in which case your audience is the marker. So it can be more academic and it can sound even more formal that way. If you were speaking to a younger audience, you need to make the language more casual. Okay, so pay attention to the audience. And secondly, as I said, personalize the language a little bit more anyway, just by using things like I, we, our, and having some rhetorical questions in there. But the overall structure, yes, is the same, unless you have been explicitly told otherwise by the teacher. For adapting to questions, is it primarily in topic sentences you change, an intro and conclusion? Yes, it is primarily in that. Introduction is absolutely key. The intro is where you show the marker and you prove to the marker that you can write not only in a sophisticated way, but in a way that really unpacks the question in a similar way to what I've been showing you with the examples today. So intro is absolutely essential. At least one key term in every single sentence of the introduction. Mandatory, no synonyms, use at least one, maybe two, depending on the type of question you get. And that will show the marker that you're actually trying to answer the question. And if you are in fact answering the question, you will expand on those key terms every time you use them. Topic sentences and link sentences are the same. Absolutely essential in the topic sentences to be hitting that question directly. Don't worry about synonyms. Don't avoid it. You have to tackle it directly. And then even though your evidence might be the same throughout and the general structure of your argument probably is going to be the same, and that's a good thing because it's going to help you write a lot faster. You've already got your evidence all sorted. The way you explain it should be tweaked as well. So your effects, your explanations, if you can find little phrases or words that can more subtly adjust, right? Slight adjustments to hit the question, even better. So inside of the bodies should still be tailored to the question, but probably less so, they probably don't require as much time and attention into rephrasing them. Any other questions before we wrap up? Remember, guys, Jedi is here. We have launched the new Jedi platform, which is pretty crazy. So just to show you again, you can jump on here, go to the Jedi website. I think it was back here. Jedi website. Go to Jedi. Follow the prompts. Boost your marks with instant feedback. There we go. Start it today, and that will take you here. You can literally start a new draft, enter in any question, enter in your response, request feedback. Jedi will deliver that feedback. Okay, question? Any big things on adapting to a question specifically for Mod A? The rules of adaptation are the same. So if you get a question for Module A, it's the same approach as a question for the common module or Module B. The only difference would be based on specific changes to the question. So if the question was about a different idea or it used a different word, then you have to unpack those words. But identify the key terms. There's 2 or 3 usually in a question. Unpack them, meaning be specific, say something specific about them, try and show the relationship between some of the key terms, and adapt those terms to your overall argument. The argument that you wanted to say in the first place, weave in those key terms of the question. Reword what you wanted to say in terms of the question so that you're still basically making the same argument if you can. But the rules of adapting are the same for all types of essays. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If there's no other questions, I'll jump onto another live soon. Really appreciate you guys following along here. I hope that the intro advice, because we did a couple of introductions, I hope that those tips really helped you. Remember, Jedd-AI.com is where to go if you're interested in getting access to Jedi. Even you can start with a term. And what I'll do for people who are still on right now, discount coming, 25% discount. Hang on a second. Let me get it for you. If you're already signed up, I think Sam's already using it. Sam, if you missed out on the discount, I'll make sure I prioritize another essay review in one of these sessions for you so that you still get the value there. The discount code is, I think it's FB24. Okay, Jedd-AI.com. This is the code for Jedi. So if you put in FB24, that's FB24. Put that in when you check out to buy the Jedi subscription, either for the term or for the year. And then I think the year's better value. And then that will save you 25%. I think you've got to do that in the next, 3 days. You got 3 days to use that. So all the best, guys. Let me know how you go with it. And I'll see you in the next one, hopefully next Thursday, similar time. Peace. See you later.